Hello, I am ACCC President, Dr. Randall Oyer. On behalf of the Association of Community Cancer Centers, I'm honored today to present the 2020 ACCC David King Community Clinical Scientist Award. Established in 2006, this award recognizes clinical researchers who demonstrate leadership in the development, participation, and evaluation of clinical studies, and who are active in the development of new screening, risk assessment, treatment, or supportive care programs for cancer patients. Dr. David K. King was an ACCC past president who himself died of cancer. Dr. King's career was devoted to advocacy for access to quality cancer care and for advancement of clinical research in the community setting. This year's David King Award recipient is Dr. Worta McCaskill-Stevens, whose career is also devoted to advocacy for access to quality cancer care and for advancement of clinical research in the community setting. Dr. McCaskill-Stevens is a medical oncologist and chief of the Community Oncology and Prevention Trials Research Group, which houses NCORP, the critically important NCI Community Cancer Research Program. NCORP's mission is to bring cancer clinical trials to people in their own communities, and we note that the majority of NCORP sites are ACCC Cancer Program members. Dr. McCaskill-Stevens' effective leadership of the Community Oncology and Prevention Trials Research Group has created community and academic partnerships, expanded types and numbers of trials available in communities across the U.S., incorporated disparities research, and has included biobanking to advance precision medicine research. Dr. McCaskill-Stevens is also a leading breast cancer researcher, having served as program director for the study of tamoxifen and raloxifene, or STAR, leader of NCI's Community Clinical Oncology Program, CCOP, Breast Cancer Prevention Network, and a member of NCI's Breast Cancer Steering Committee. Dr. McCaskill-Stevens is a recognized leader in furthering the advancement of minority investigators in cancer research. In her own words, Dr. McCaskill-Stevens notes, when one matches curiosity and opportunity with hard work, training, and a great mentor, the possible contributions to your communities, to the world, and to yourself are endless. Dr. McCaskill-Stevens is a physician, a scientist, a mentor, and a leader. And the ACCC thanks Dr. McCaskill-Stevens for accepting the 2020 ACCC David King Community Clinical Scientist Award. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Oyer, and thank you to the Association of Community Cancer Centers. I am very honored to be the recipient of the 2020 David King Community Clinical Scientist Award. Thank you very much. I'm Worta McCaskill-Stevens again from the National Cancer Institute. I am also very proud to continue our journey that began in the mid-1980s. During the NCI director, Dr. DeVita, the Community Clinical Oncology Program began in 1983. The minority-based CCOPs began in 1990. These programs were designed to provide access to cancer clinical trials in the communities where patients live. It was also the NCI Community Cancer Centers program, which was also designed to look at how research can be conducted within community cancer practices. In 2014, there was a request during the time of the consolidation of the cooperative groups by the Institute of Medicine to have specific approaches to research in the community setting. The NCORP was designed in 2014 to continue the legacy of the previous programs as a single program and to make sure that there was further access to clinical trials outside of the academic community. It's important to note that there were significant changes in the approach to systemic therapy, just as there was in the mid-1980s. There were also significant opportunities, very similar to what was happening in the 1980s as well, and major changes was in the conduct of practices within the communities. You will see on this page the board that actually approved these programs. So again, I am very honored to be able to work with passion to continue the legacies of these programs. The NCORE has a very wide scope of research. There are symptom management studies that look at toxicities from treatment and cancer. We have studies that approach palliative care, cancer prevention, those patients who have been treated for curative intent who are being followed in surveillance, screening, and of course, quality of life, which is so important, that are embedded in treatment trials. Our investigators within NCORE are also required to enroll trials in treatment, advanced imaging studies, and importantly, looking at precision medicine involved in tissue collection so that they're banked and that we can make use of the advanced technologies that are available to help us get toward precision medicine. We also, in 2014, brought into play cancer care delivery research, which is a multidisciplinary science to improve clinical outcomes and patient satisfaction and well-being. And we do this by looking beyond patients, involving clinicians and organization factors that influence the delivery of care. We have always been interested in cancer disparities. We had focused on enrolling underserved populations from underserved areas. We have expanded a bit to make sure that we also address specific research questions that emanate from the communities that are so very important in terms of reaching equity and good outcomes across all populations. And finally, in order to move forward to take advantage of new technology, we have established the availability of biobanks so that specimens can be stored, so incorporated into clinical trials, as well as stored for future research to take advantage of evolving technologies. Let me talk a little bit about the structure of NCORE. There are 7 research bases. 5 of them are cooperative groups that involve large oncological organizations and are funded for treatment. However, we fund them separately to conduct trials in our research portfolio. They develop the concepts, they manage the data and analysis of these concepts and protocols. And the community sites, of which there are 32, and 14 minority underserved sites, actually conduct the trials. But more importantly, they also provide input to the research bases so that the research questions reflect the needs and the issues that they are noted in their own catchment areas. The minority underserved sites reflect those populations and areas in the country where there are very large racial and ethnic populations and rural populations. NCORE enrolls children as well as adults and those individuals who are also at risk of developing cancer. We also are a community academic partnership such that academic institutions have access to our cancer control, prevention, and surveillance trials. This is what we look like across the country, across the states, including Puerto Rico and Guam. We have over 1,000 sites, 4,000 investigators, and if we include the entire oncological team, we have over 9,000 investigators who are participating in our trials. We have safety net hospitals, we have integrated systems. Increasingly, we're having more healthcare systems that are participating within our program. We are a clinical trials network, so let me just share with you that from the inception of NCORE to July 2020, over 51,000 patients and at-risk patients were enrolled into our clinical trials. I've shown here the enrollment by year for cancer prevention and control, as well as treatment. This reflects the change in the generation of trials. These are generally smaller trials, excluding the large adjuvant breast and bowel trials that we had several decades ago. Trials are more targeted and actually are functioning quite well across the spectrum. In terms of minority enrollment to our program, for the minority underserved sites, the enrollment of minorities is 55% and 16% from the community programs. Again, this is by racial and ethnic minorities as defined by the OMB. Let me share with you some of the studies that are ongoing in our program. As you may recall, there was the pivotal molecular analysis for therapy trial choice, the MATCH trial. The big question was, how is this trial going to function in the community setting? where the tumors were agnostic, where we were sequencing tumors in order to provide targeted therapies available for our patients. 43% of the enrollment to the MATCH trial came from the community setting. This is very important because it was truth of feasibility within the trial, interest, and the ability of our investigators to get these patients enrolled into trials. Since that time, we have several initiatives that are looking also at broadly collecting tissue from protocols, testing feasibility, but also looking specifically at advanced cancers, looking at resistance and sensitivity to FDA-approved molecularly targeted agents that are being treated with standard of care in the community settings. These are very important trials, somewhat labor intense, but again, reflective of the feasibility within the community setting. Let me share with you a couple of examples in symptom management. As I mentioned, we do include children. We have a phase 3 trial that's looking at memantine, protecting those children who are having cranial radiation therapy for primary central nervous tumors. This is important because we know that during these periods of time, the cognition and the development of cognition is really important and very sensitive period during that time. So exploring ways to protect that for these children who are undergoing treatment for brain cancers is extremely important. I'm talking a lot about precision medicine, but I also want to point out the fact that we also have trials that look at persistent issues for which we don't have mechanisms, we don't have precision. I've cited here a trial where we're looking to prevent nausea and vomiting in those chemotherapy agents that are highly emetogenic. And finally, I want to comment on our prevention trials. We know that carcinoma of the pancreas is a very, very bad cancer to HEMS in terms of mortality. We have a study looking at new information that suggests that new onset diabetes is a precursor to those individuals who develop pancreatic cancer. This is called the new onset diabetes cohort. It is a study that is a collaboration between institutes, PANCOS, and the Early Detection Network within the National Cancer Institute. So this is a very important study that will establish a biorepository from which investigators can further interrogate this important concept. And finally, we have a study looking at those individuals, those women who are BRCA1 carriers. And this study is looking to see if we can reduce the risk of ovarian cancer, building on the concept that the origin of it is in the fallopian tubes. In the area of cancer care delivery, which has been very exciting, I want to share with you that one of the studies, first studies that was in this science was assessing hardship in patients who had advanced metastatic colorectal cancer. And this study was presented preliminarily at the ASCO in 2020, and it found that having had questionnaires that looked at the financial status of patients, their income going into their credit reports, that 75% of those patients who had advanced colorectal went into significant financial hardship by having to sell their homes, having a 20% reduction in income, having credit card debts that were significant, with significant financial hardship. We now have an ongoing study looking at hematological tumors, again, addressing the question of financial hardship. Finally, as you can see, we are throughout the country. We have a study looking at stress, depression, and anxiety in the rural areas of cancer survivors, looking and trying to get at the fact of resource activity for those individuals who are having this distress after rural cancer, and think of interventions that would help to ameliorate them. So again, our strategies for disparities, which is really important for our program, have included providing access through our clinical trials. We also focus on specific questions, developing concepts for underrepresented populations, or underrepresented areas, and other oncological issues that are pertinent to underserved populations. And finally, to evaluate the institutions from which these patients are treated, and understanding how these systems can help to alleviate cancer disparities as well. So let me just share with you a few items about cancer disparities. One of the questions that we are frequently asked is, who participates in your clinical trials? So we develop a tool to expand the data that we collect about our patients. Currently in clinical trials, we collect race, we collect age, and the insurance status at the time of enrolling in trials. In this tool, we ask questions about education, about income, about country of origin, comorbidities, to help us better understand who the patients are and how we might improve their participation. We have over 30,000 entries in this tool, which requires the patient to give consent to collect this information. We have in press in cancer results from 19,000 of these individuals. And importantly, for those patients who provided further information, 74% of those patients enroll into a clinical trial. If we look at those individuals who did not enroll into a clinical trial, half of them were ineligible. 40% that were eligible declined. We will need to really look very carefully at those patients who decline and see if there are ways that we can further inform them or their providers or alleviate barriers to them participating in clinical trials. We want to make sure that patients have choices to participate in clinical trials. So this is a very rich resource for investigators as well as for the NCI in being informed about who participates in clinical trials. We have studies looking at certainly an underserved population of adolescents and young adults, looking at how chemotherapy impacts their fertility. We have cancer moonshot initiatives that are looking at, importantly, our patient-reported outcomes. We often find that these tools have not been validated in other languages, so this is an initiative to help validate them. And make them culturally competent in getting this important information from patients. We also are aware of the fact that we don't have great representation of elderly patients. We need to better understand their functionality so that we can make sure that the trials are sensitive to the toxicities and the ability for these patients to adhere to the intervention. So we have research that's looking at geriatric measurements that we can use as a tool in our clinical trials. And final example that I'd like to share with you is that we're looking at 6 cancers that we know in racial ethnic populations occur at a very early age. These 5 solid tumors and multiple myeloma are being sequenced so that we can better understand the mechanisms or the etiology of these early onset cancers so that interventions can be designed for them. I would be remiss if I didn't make comments about the ongoing pandemic that we have. This graph here shows the pattern of enrollment, and certainly we see the March-April dip in accrual that's shown here in red. We also show that our tool, which is collecting information about the patient, has really sort of paralleled that enrollment. This enrollment, which is the cancer control prevention part, really parallels what we saw in treatment as well. There are dips as in the November and December that we see, but as you can see, we're pretty much getting close to where we were before. There's variability as we see variability of the pandemic and the COVID positivity across the country. But we are very appreciative and very supportive for these investigators who are meeting the challenges during these very, very difficult times. The NCI has relaxed some of its policies so that remote consenting can be done. Drug distribution for our investigative registration agents can be conducted in a manner that's feasible within the community during this period of time. I'd just like to say a little bit about my career pathway. There are always stops along the way. It's important to have mentors. It's important to have diversity in oncology practices. I've had several careers. I've gone through academia. There are always curves in the past with either your family or your children. It's always nice to be have a balance in your life and to take advantage of many things. The things usually come into play You certainly need a passion and focus. And I always say, I think to young investigators, the curiosity is really a key. I've lingered at the National Cancer Institute. I find that it was very difficult to leave full-time patient care, but I have come to appreciate that what we do in terms of research has a major impact across the country, and it affects more patients. But it is difficult to leave clinical practice, but it's very nice to have the clinical experience to bring to the table as trials are being designed. There are always two families. There's your family, as I have shown on this slide, who help to keep you in balance. There's also your work family. I could not have been as successful and had the support from my passion without the two of them. So I'd like to end by saying, to love what you do and feel like it really matters, how could anything be more fun? Thank you very, very much again to the Association of Community Cancer Centers, and thank you very much.